Okay, let's jump into this deep dive. We've got a really fascinating story today, maybe a bit mysterious too, focusing on World War II.
That's right. We're looking at the life of a Luftwaffe pilot, Rudolf Mons.
And what's striking about him, looking at the sources, is this incredibly fast rise through the ranks, got some of the highest decorations,
Hmm.
but his early life, it's almost like a blank slate in the records.
Very much so. And his story intersects directly with, well, one of the war's worst maritime disasters involving the troopship HMT Rhona, an event that was actually kept under wraps for decades.
Kept secret. Why?
Well, that's part of what we need to untack from the sources. It involves new German tech, huge loss of life, and reasons why the Allies wanted it hushed up. So our goal here is to see how Mons likely fits into that Rona attack and why the whole thing stayed hidden for so long.
Right. So our mission, using the material we've got, is basically to piece together Mons' journey. From this Austrian soldier to a top Luftwaffe officer, figure out why his last mission was so significant, and tackle this mystery of the Rona disaster secrecy.
Exactly. We'll touch on his sort of undocumented start, trace that rapid career path in Austria and then Germany, look at his combat record, the special units he was in.
Including working with new aircraft tech, apparently.
Yeah, that too. And then we'll really zero in on the Rona attack itself, the event he seems tied to. Then discuss the secrecy and the questions around his own fate, like the fact he hasn't got a known grave.
Okay, let's start at the beginning, or what little beginning the sources give us. Rudolf Mons, born October 2nd, 1914, Vienna, Austria.
Correct. And like you said, the sources immediately flag this lack of info on his early life. It's almost as if his story starts when he joins the Austrian Bundesheer, the Federal Army, February 1st, 1934.
And he starts out as an Alpenjäger, mountain infantry.
Which seems worlds away from being a pilot, right?
Uh,
But the sources suggest he showed a real knack for flying pretty quickly.
A knack is putting it mildly, it seems. He transfers to the Austrian Air Force, the Fliegertruppe, quite early.
And gets promoted fast. By 1937, just 3 years after joining the Army, he's already a lieutenant in an air regiment.
Wow. And then a year later, Feb 38, he's a lieutenant in a bomber squadron, Bombenstaffel Nitcher 1.
It really paints a picture of someone identified very early on as having serious talent, especially within the smaller pre-war Austrian military structure.
Then comes March 1938, the Anschluss. Germany annexes Austria. That must have changed everything.
A huge turning point. For Mons, the sources indicate it led to a pretty smooth transition, actually, into the much, much larger German Luftwaffe.
So he goes from the Austrian air arm straight into Luftwaffe flight training. LKS Fürstenfeldbruck.
That's right, a primary flight school. He's now part of the German military machine.
And then by February 1940, he lands in I Group of Kampfgeschwader 40, KG-40.
Yeah, KG-40 was officially stood up in July 1940 in France, Bordeaux-Marignac, though the unit existed before. And understanding KG-40 is really key here.
Why is that? What was special about them?
Well, according to the sources, KG-40 became the Luftwaffe's main maritime patrol unit, a specialized role.
So, searching for ships.
Initially, yes. Reconnaissance over the North Atlantic, finding Allied convoys, mainly for the Kriegsmarine, the U-boats. But they very quickly became attackers themselves.
Oh, okay. So they're operating right in the heart of the Battle of the Atlantic, a critical area.
Absolutely critical. And Mons seems to have excelled almost immediately in this maritime strike role.
How so?
The sources point to an early success. January 8th, 1941, he's credited with seriously damaging a big freighter, 10,000 tons, northwest of Donegal Bay.
And he got recognition for that.
Instantly, mentioned in dispatches the very next day. That's fast.
It really is. And things kept moving for him.
Definitely. By May 5th, 1941, he's promoted to Oberleutnant, first lieutenant, and on that same day, he gets the Ehrenpokal, the honor goblet.
What was that awarded for?
Exceptional flying achievements. It wasn't just handed out, it recognized real skill and results.
But the big one came later that year.
Yes. September 18th, 1941. Still an Oberleutnant in KG-40, he receives the Ritterkreuz des Eisernen Kreuzes, the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross.
Okay, that's a very big deal. One of Germany's highest military honors. What did the sources say earned him that?
Shipping losses. The citation, according to the sources, credited him with sinking 63,000 gross register tons of Allied shipping.
63,000 tons sunk.
And severely damaging another 32,000 GRT.
Wait, add that up. That's nearly 100,000 tons of Allied shipping attributed to him and his crew. That's incredible.
It really is. And the sources note this was achieved after just 51 missions. He was flying a Focke-Wulf WW200 Condor, KG-40's main aircraft.
The Condor? Wasn't that the one Churchill called the scourge of the Atlantic?
That's the one. So yeah, getting the Knight's Cross for successes like that really cemented his reputation. He was seen as a top-tier maritime pilot.
And the promotions continued.
Yep. Hauptmann, or captain, on November 1st, 1941. But then his career takes an interesting turn. In 1942, the sources say he was temporarily attached to the technical office of the Reich Air Ministry.
Yarlam. Why?
As an expert on long-range bombing operations, it shows his practical experience was valued at a higher technical level. They wanted his input.
So pulling him out of direct combat for a bit.
Sort of. Then, in January 1942, he's given command of a special unit, Erprobungs- und Lehrstaffel He 177.
The testing and training squadron for the Heinkel He 177. That was Germany's big heavy bomber project, wasn't it? The problematic one.
Exactly. Their only operational long-range heavy bomber, and it was riddled with issues, especially engine fires. Putting Mons in charge of its testing and training squadron suggests they really rated his technical insight and leadership. He's dealing with cutting-edge but troublesome tech.
Quite a responsibility. So he's moving between combat, technical advice, and now testing.
It seems that way. By September 1st, 1943, he's on the staff of the Kommando der Erprobenstellen der Luftwaffe,
Which was
the overall command for all Luftwaffe testing establishments, a senior role overseeing evaluation of new planes, new equipment, and he gets promoted to major around this time, backdated to January 43.
a major overseeing testing. But wait, the sources also say between September and November 1943, he was commander of 2 group of KG-40 back in command.
Yes, that's right, 2 KG-40. A group is like a large squadron or a small wing, maybe 30, 40 aircraft. So he is back leading a maritime bombing unit. But the context shifts.
How so?
The sources specify this unit, 2 KG-40 under his command then, was operating in the Mediterranean theater, not the Atlantic.
Okay. Which brings us closer to
November 26, 1943. That's the date Major Rudolf Mons is reported missing in action. His plane, a Heinkel He 177 bomber with the markings F8 plus DM, went down near Bougie, Algeria, now Bijaya.
And this is happening right when the Luftwaffe is hitting Allied ships in the Med.
Precisely. And this date, November 26, and that location. It's the direct link researchers make to the HMT Rhona disaster.
The sources strongly suggest he was involved in the attack on convoy KMF-26, which included the Rhona, that very day, possibly even leading it as group commander.
That's the prevailing view based on the evidence. The attack itself on the 26th involved maybe 35 German planes against 24 Allied ships. But the weapon used was the game changer.
The guided missile you mentioned earlier.
Yes, the Henschel HS-293. The sources describe it as radio-controlled, rocket-boosted, essentially a glide bomb you could steer after launch. Very advanced stuff for 1943.
Wow. And out of all those planes, maybe many carrying these things.
The sources say only one missile seems to have found its mark that day, just one successful hit.
And it hit the HMT Rhona, which, the sources point out, was the only ship in that convoy without a barrage balloon.
Correct. Barrage balloons were a simple defense, meant to deter low-level attacks or snag aircraft. Whether its absence made Rhona an easier target for this new precision weapon, well, the sources imply it certainly didn't help.
And the impact of that one hit, devastating.
Absolutely catastrophic. The sources state it hit the engine room area, killed about 300 soldiers instantly in the explosion and ensuing chaos.
And things got worse as it sank.
Tragically, yes. Problems with lifeboats not launching properly, and the sources mention inadequate training for the troops on board. Many didn't know how to use their life vests correctly. A terrible combination.
The final toll is just staggering.
It is. The sources give the figures: 1,015 American service members dead, plus 134 British and Indian crew members lost. Over 1,100 lives.
And the sources emphasize this makes it the largest loss of U.S. troops at sea from enemy action in the entire war. In American history, even.
That's the statistic they highlight, from one guided missile hit.
So, given Mons was the commander of Taiki G-40 operating there, flying a He-177, which could carry the HS-293, and disappeared on that exact day, the connection seems incredibly strong.
It does. While other sources might name the specific pilot who launched that missile, Hans Stockterman has mentioned Mons as group commander would almost certainly have had overall operational responsibility for the mission.
Which leads us to this whole other layer, the secrecy.
Right. The sources are really clear on this. The Rhona sinking was subject to an extraordinary level of official secrecy by both the U.S. and U.K. governments.
For decades, you said.
For decades. Families weren't told the full truth. They received notifications their loved ones were missing or killed in action. But the specifics, the how, the involvement of a guided missile, that was classified.
Why? What reasons do the sources give for such intense secrecy?
Several key factors. Firstly, and maybe most importantly, military intelligence. They did not want Germany to know how effective this new HS-293 guided bomb had been. Confirming a successful hit like that could help the enemy refine the weapon or its tactics.
So deny the enemy confirmation of their weapon's success. Makes sense from a wartime perspective.
What else?
Morale. Huge concerns about the impact on morale back home. And among troops, if the scale of this loss, over 1,000 Americans killed by a single advanced enemy weapon, became public knowledge.
1,000 lives from one hit.
Yeah, you can see how that would be damaging news.
And thirdly, the sources suggest there might have been worries about questions being asked. Questions about the convoy's protection, why the Rhona lacked a barrage balloon, the effectiveness of the rescue efforts. Easier, perhaps, to just classify the whole event.
So it just stayed buried. For how long?
Until the year 2000, 57 years after the sinking. That's when the U.S. government, through a House resolution, HRS 408, formally acknowledged the incident and the circumstances, finally brought it out of the shadows.
57 years. That's a lifetime. Which brings us back to Mons himself, missing November 26, 1943. Confirmed died that day, but still listed as missing months later.
Yeah, the records show him still officially listed as missing in action as late as August 1944, but historical consensus is clear. He died on November 26, 1943, in the Mediterranean when his aircraft went down.
And yet, as we noted right at the start, no known grave, no marker. Why not?
Well, the most likely reason, according to the sources, is simply that his remains were never recovered from the sea, lost with his aircraft.
But usually, even for those lost at sea, there's some kind of memorial marker, a cenotaph, right?
Often, yes. But the sources suggest the lack of one for Mons probably just reflects the utter chaos of the war's final years and the collapse of Nazi Germany's administrative functions. Record-keeping, arranging memorials, it all fell apart. The sources don't really draw a direct line between the Rhona secrecy and his lack of a grave marker specifically. It seems more a casualty of the wider wartime confusion.
So pulling it all together, Rudolf Mons, a man who appears almost out of nowhere in the records, climbs incredibly fast, becomes this highly decorated maritime ace.
Then gets involved in testing advanced, if troublesome, technology like the Hell 177.
And his career seems to culminate in leading, or being centrally involved in, this attack using a revolutionary guided weapon.
An attack that results in the HMT Rhona disaster, a horrific loss of life compounded by the decades of secrecy that followed, driven by military necessity and morale concerns.
It's a story that really ties together individual skill, the terrifying leaps in wartime technology, like those first guided missiles, and the brutal human cost. And that secrecy adds such a heavy layer to it all. Mons himself, decorated major, expert pilot, no known grave, end up being this symbol of the war's often hidden, complex, and unresolved aspects.
Absolutely. This whole deep dive into Mons and the Rhona really underscores how history isn't always neat. It's often fragmented, obscured by wartime fog or deliberate policy, and takes a long time to piece together.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? What other stories, what other crucial pieces of the past, maybe tied to individuals like Mons or events like the Rhona, are still out there, not fully uncovered or acknowledged yet, waiting to shift our understanding of things we thought we knew?